In 2012, there was a small zombie survival game that took the world by storm called The War Z. With millions of active players, this game was DayZ before DayZ, and it was wildly successful. But its history is more complicated than you could ever imagine. After receiving a title change to Infestation Survivor Stories due to trademark disputes, being removed from the Steam store multiple times, rebranding itself under 5+ different titles, having hackers take control of the game to plan future updates, and spawning nearly a dozen spin-offs, one of which was a partnership with the son of George Romero, director of the undisputed best zombie movie of all time, the game still managed to be both an insane commercial success and an astronomical flop at the same time. With a controversial creator responsible for creating some of the worst received video games of all time, an insane story that took us nearly 6 months to research, and involvement from extremely wealthy industry veterans, including the ex-CEO of Atari, this is the story of how Infestation Survivor Stories, The War Z, and all of these other spin-offs died over 5 times. Our story begins with a very controversial man named Sergey Titov. Today, he's known for a variety of different disastrous projects, ranging from big rigs over-the-road racing, which is openly criticized as being one of the worst games of all time, to various survival game asset flips and scams like Romero's Aftermath, The War Z, Infestation Survivor Stories, and Outbreak New Dawn, all of which, by the way, are basically the same game and are a part of this entire story that we will get to in a second. His reputation is less than stellar, and he's probably one of the most infamous game developers in the PC gaming space, for good reason. He gets a lot of hate in the space and is considered to be a scammer and a fraud by many. So that's why for this video, I wanted to get to understand him so that we can present this information in the best way possible. So I reached out to him directly and exchanged dozens of messages via text to help supplement this research. I'll get to the specifics later in the video, but I need to start by talking about his origin story. He worked in the games industry for a few decades in a variety of roles, and later worked at Riot Games as a technical director on League of Legends from 2006 to 2008 before it ever launched, leaving solely because he didn't like MOBAs. The exact same month, he founded the Arctos Entertainment Group. Arctos acquired Void Productions LLC in 2009, a company that specialized in developing technology for MMOs. Later that year, Sergey established a games development company called Online Warmongers alongside Frederick Chesnace and Matt Candler. Chesnace was the CEO of Atari from July of 2004 until July of 2007, and Matt Candler was formerly an executive at Paramount Pictures. So this new company had some serious cash to throw around. Online Warmongers existed solely to create a new game called War Inc. Battlezone, which was a free-to-play MMO shooter that released on July 19, 2011. The game was developed using the Eclipse engine created by Void Productions. The game received pretty mixed reviews and never really amassed much of a player base. As a result, it stopped receiving updates as of August of 2012, and the development studio closed on January 2nd, 2014. But that's not the game that we're here to discuss. Our game's story spawns from the same origin as a game called DayZ. DayZ released into early access in late April or early May of 2012 as a highly successful Arma 2 mod. This mod was so popular that people were buying Arma 2 just to play it, and over 300,000 sales of this game can be attributed just to the mod itself. Titov, after the underwhelming release of War Inc. Battlezone, saw the success and saw an opportunity to capitalize on this audience. So he got to work on a new project called The War Z. In an interview with Eurogamer, he admits that The War Z was, quote, based on DayZ hype, and we thought we could make a game better, and I think that we did make it better than the DayZ mod at least. Although a full standalone DayZ game was announced on August 7th, 2012, and fans were excited, they were basing their hopes for a successful standalone game on a mod developed largely by one person. The reality of this mod being turned into a fully fleshed out experience in a reasonable timeline was highly unlikely, leaving a lot of excitement for an open world zombie survival game on the table for Titov to capitalize on. So, of course, he went for it. The War Z opened its doors to the public on October 15th, 2012, just 5 months after the original DayZ mod was released with an alpha testing period. It was a lightning fast turnaround, and it was pretty clear how the developers had pulled it off. The game was terrible. Still, even awful games are notoriously difficult and expensive to make, especially an ambitious open-world MMO. So it begs the question, who are these developers and how did they pull this off? As said directly by Titov himself in our conversations, the game was developed developed by Hammerpoint Interactive and published by OP Productions. OP Productions was a 50-50 venture between Arctos Entertainment and Curve Ventures, the company of Sergey Titov and Frederick Chesnace respectively. Both partners equally made decisions for War Z, but unlike Titov, Chesnace wasn't a public-facing member, so his involvement was practically unknown all this time, even until today. In fact, there are pretty much no public records of Chesnace being involved in the project at all, so it comes as no surprise that Titov has always been the one to get all of the flack for any issues involving War Z or Infestation. Not super important right now, but keep this in mind for the rest of this story. Anyways, since War Z used the same engine as War Inc. Battlezone, had many of the same developers involved in its production, and because of the fact that Titov has admitted to reusing assets in many of his later titles, it's extremely likely that Battlezone's assets were used to help throw together War Z so quickly. It seemed like an easy asset flip that could capitalize on the DayZ trend and turn into something much larger. But unfortunately, Titov and the team at Hammerpoint and OP Productions had no idea what was about to happen. The future of this game was uncertain from the start. But one thing that is for certain is that eating fast food is out in 2025. Eating stuff like this makes you feel bad, sleep worse, work less effectively, and lowers your mental focus to inevitably make you worse at video games. That's why I reached out personally to work with the sponsor of today's video, Control. Control is an awesome brand of healthier snacks and shakes that have good macros, good flavors, and are extremely easy and convenient for gamers, athletes, or anyone just looking for better snack options to fit into their daily routine. I love their protein bars, and each bar has over 15 grams of protein, which is a huge win for me. They also have protein cookies that taste really good, and meal replacement shakes that come in a variety of flavors and only have 1 gram of sugar. Anytime I get an impulse to order something unhealthy through a delivery service, I reach for a Control bar or shake instead, and I really do think that this is a much better option for gamers who want to take control of their diet. Pun intended. If you want to make better snack choices like me, go to drinkcontrol.com/robokast and use code robokast to get 10% off your order. Or if you want to save some money on shipping and get these amazing products quicker, you can go into your local GNC and pick some up. Thanks again to Control for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to what happens next with the War Z. The game was released on Steam on December 17th, 2012, under a so-called Foundation release. One thing worth noting is that this predated the official early access program Steam offers today, so there weren't guidelines for advertising this sort of thing. The game quickly rose to the top of Steam's charts and sold hundreds of thousands of copies. In fact, it managed to reach 700,000 users within the span of 2 months, split between Steam and direct purchases through their website. But things weren't great beneath the surface, as players quickly realized that the game's store page blatantly lied about many features. This led to quite a few accusations of false advertising towards the developers. The controversy was exacerbated by Titov's comments and inability to accept criticism in the media. In a response to false advertising accusations, he said that, quote, "There were a number of customers that felt information about the game was presented in a way that could have allowed for multiple interpretations." But the fact of the matter was that the store page claimed that there were features that did not exist in the game whatsoever, such as 100-player servers or a hardcore mode. There were only a maximum of 40 players in servers at the time, and no other game modes. Worst of all, these false claims were still an issue even after the store page had already been updated to be more accurate. Originally, it claimed that the game would be a one-time purchase with no microtransactions, a fact that was just simply false. It also boasted that the game had an ability to gain experience points and spend them on various skills, which again was a mechanic that didn't even exist. Because of these false claims that were blatantly displayed on the Steam page, the game and the development team got a lot of negative sentiment and feedback. Players flocked to the game's Steam forums to complain, but hundreds of complaints were removed, and people who posted them were banned by a moderator named Kook. Predictably, censoring the negative comments on the forums only caused them to be amplified on places like Reddit, which brought even more attention to the problem. As it caught more and more eyes, Valve started to pay attention. Things came to a head when a petition came out requesting that Steam remove the game from the store, which received over 500 signatures. The massive spotlight being put onto the company from the fans, the media, and the increasingly popular petition made it to where Valve had to do something, and they removed the War Z from Steam just 2 days after launch on December 19th. Additionally, Valve even gave dissatisfied customers refunds for the game if requested. This was years before their current global refund policy was enacted, so it was an exception made solely over the outrage surrounding this game. The insane attention and the delisting of the game from Steam finally sparked an apology from Sergey Titov on December 27th, where he admitted his arrogance was to blame and that he would do better in the future. But despite these claims, in a follow-up interview on February 14th, 2013, he continued to deflect and avoided acknowledging wrongdoings as much as possible. And then, in a Q&A with Forbes, he claimed that the controversy was because of how the, quote, DayZ mod is a love/hate type thing for gamers. So, when we announced the War Z, it instantly became a love/hate type thing too. This entire situation was a PR nightmare to say the least. But hey, maybe the game was actually good and these controversies would blow over, right? Well, not so much. Imagine all the gameplay from DayZ, scavenging for supplies on an open map while avoiding zombies and other players, eating and drinking scraps to get by, and choosing your fights carefully. Except, barely anything works as intended, there's even less content, and you're constantly bombarded by microtransactions. This is what the War Z was like. Guns were so plentiful that you'd practically be dead the second you left cover in a city, making it extremely difficult for new players to get a footing and causing all the interactions to be one-dimensional and making the game feel as if it had no community. This was made worse by a lackluster chat system and a lack of friends list, no player name tags, and nothing to actually do in the game to work together with other players. So it was an MMO that didn't even really feel like an MMO. Other issues included a poor anti-cheat system, resulting in hackers, unstable servers, performance issues, and numerous exploits that allowed duplication glitches to destroy the survival experience. And best of all was the horrendously long respawn timer, which lasted an entire hour before you could even hop back into the game. This was bad enough, but it got even worse when on the day after launch, the respawn timer was changed to 4 hours, and the ability to bypass it via a microtransaction was also added. You could make another character to bypass the timer, but there were only 5 character slots in all. So considering how trigger-happy established players were, you could realistically go through all 5 slots in those 4 hours, forcing you to fork over some cash if you wanted to keep playing, in a game that you already paid $15 for. So it should come as no surprise that the critics were barely kinder to the game than the general players. Both GameSpy and Metro gave the War Z the lowest possible scores, and the highest reviews capped out at a 3 out of 10, under the assumption that it would improve over time. The War Z was called, quote, a technical disaster, and, quote, a prime example of a game that oversells and underdelivers. So maybe it was a good thing that this game was removed from Steam, at least for a little while. 2 months later, on February 26, 2013, the War Z returned to Steam. And unsurprisingly, it still had quite a few problems. There were definitely less than before, and the store page did actually reflect the contents of the game, but these slight improvements did little to ease the overwhelmingly negative perception of the game. And things weren't about to improve just yet, because a month later, around early April, an administrator account was hacked by using a known exploit from Hammerpoint's past title, War Inc. Battlezone. This meant that basically every single user's emails and passwords were compromised, and there was little communication of this from the developers. Not long after, the entirety of the War Z's source code was leaked online. This led to a flood of hackers overtaking the game and spawned an entire sub-community where people created their own War Z servers with custom features and changes. Both Hammerpoint and OP Productions never attempted to shut down any of these illegal servers either, which allowed the ambitions of this community to grow wildly and build upon one another. This led to more of these servers popping up and new features coming to existing ones. Little did anyone know, but this would eventually change the future of the entire game. But in the meantime, it was business as usual until June of 2013 rolled around, where it was announced that the War Z would be changing its title as a result of a trademark dispute due to the World War Z movie. Also, around this time, an AMA was hosted on Reddit by Dean Hall, the creator of the DayZ mod. In it, he expressed a great deal of frustration with the War Z for a multitude of reasons. The way that the game was a low-quality product, churned out to capitalize on the DayZ hype, and the fact that it had a name so similar that Hall had actually been confronted by family members who confused War Z's unethical practices with DayZ. You'd think that the game would be as good as dead with all of these factors, right? But this legal trouble with the game's title actually ended up being one of the best things to happen to it. Coinciding with the new title change, Infestation Survivor Stories went on sale for the very first time on June 15th, 2013. This brought the price from $14.99 all the way down to $3.74. And because of these combined factors, the game's peak player count skyrocketed. Prior to this, the maximum peak was around 5,000 players, but now it had gone all the way up to 15,000 players, literally tripling the previous height. This is where many players discovered that for this price point, and after some updates to the game, they actually kind of liked it. I mean, don't get me wrong, a lot of people still absolutely hated the game, but even if just a third of these 15,000 players kept playing, that's still 5,000 active players. And, well, that's exactly what happened. As a result of these players sticking around, the developers continued to update Infestation survivor stories. In October, they released an anniversary update that added a considerable amount of new content, such as vehicles and crafting, which were highly requested features. Even more surprising, the update completely removed the cash shop from the game, replacing it with an in-game marketplace where players could trade items with in-game currency. This update completely removed the pay-to-win elements from the game. They also created a way for people to try it out for free with the introduction of demo accounts. Infestation survivor stories still had a lot of issues, such as hackers and a slew of bugs and glitches, and the game was pretty ugly, but it seemed as if there was an earnest effort from the devs to turn things around and restore goodwill. And everything continued in this manner with a notable spike of players beginning on March 13th of 2014 due to a first-time 90% sale for the game, bringing the price down to $1.49. This led to a 7,200 peak in players and helped to bump the overall sales to more than 2.5 million copies, numbers that were confirmed by Titov himself. However, the players from this sale seem to have left sooner than the last, with the player count hitting an all-time low and falling below 2,000 players in August. With this decline, it seemed as if the game was finally at the end of its rope. But unknown to many in the West, Infestation found a huge audience in Thailand after OP Productions teamed up with Electronics Extreme to produce a localized version of the game. Gameplay videos of this version received hundreds of thousands of views, and the game itself became a huge esports phenomenon as well, with major sponsors and massive prize pools. So even as its Western presence dwindled, Infestation in Thailand was still extremely successful financially and ultimately found a different target audience altogether. But the developers were far from done trying to cater to its original Western markets, because behind the scenes, they were cooking up something entirely new with Romero's Aftermath. In June of 2014, Sergey Titov founded Free Reign Entertainment as a new development studio, who would be tasked with creating a new game called Romero's Aftermath. For this particular title, it was the same team that created Infestation Survivor Stories. The game would be published again by OP Productions, the partnership between Titov and Chesnace, and Free Reign East, which was a company established to handle the various games' IPs. Despite the fact that Titov founded and owned Free Reign Entertainment, he actually had no involvement with Free Reign East. It was his business partners that operated it. Free Reign East would also never be used again after Romero's Aftermath. I figured I'd explain this simply because the difference between Free Reign and Free Reign East is kind of complicated. Romero's Aftermath was another zombie survival game that reused a lot of the same assets as Infestation Survivor Stories and was pretty much the exact same game altogether. This title was a collaboration with George C. Romero, the son of George A. Romero, who directed the Night of the Living Dead films that basically set the foundation for modern zombie movies and shows. Because of the sheer number of repurposed assets and code from Infestation Survivor Stories, the game got quite a bit of hate from people who were already familiar with the chaos surrounding the other title, and Titov got quite a bit of criticism. It seemed like a classic scam to get more money out of uneducated consumers, and Titov was thrust into the spotlight for all the wrong reasons once again. But in our conversations, Titov openly referred to it as a reskin of Infestation Survivor Stories and seemed as if he wasn't denying this reality. In fact, he also stated that he wanted the game to be a free DLC for Infestation, but that his business partners, aka Fred Chesnace from Atari, believed that a new game would be more profitable. Titov relented, but did insist that all owners of Infestation should receive the game for free. This is why if you look at the Steam reviews of the game, nearly every single one says product received for free. A lot of the players checked it out as a result, but few stayed around and even fewer actually purchased the game. Despite being a huge flop, it received support for a year before shutting down on November 21st, 2016. So, because of how similar this game was to Infestation Survivor Stories, it also can be classified as another part of this series of zombie game failures. This was emphasized by Titov stepping down from his role as executive producer and creative director for the original Infestation in 2016. It was just a matter of time until the franchise crumbled at this rate. Or, at least, once again, you would think. While this entire Romero's Aftermath debacle was going on, the hacking scene for Infestation had been developing massively over the years. At this point, there was a variety of servers to choose from, but the most notable one was created by a Swedish hacker called Fredakis, who had been active in the community since its inception. inception. He got his start by developing cheats for Infestation, such as aimbot, screenshot blockers, night vision, and more. But eventually, he began his own Infestation server using the leaked source code that I mentioned earlier and called it NewZ. It had been around since at least January 14th of 2014, and after a couple of years, Ferdakis was looking to publish the server on Steam for profit. So he got in touch with OP Productions and managed to strike a deal. Ferdakis gets to release his server on Steam as an official part of the Infestation franchise, but he will handle the development of the game, receive no investment from OP Productions, and they will take a cut of all of the profits. Again, this was said directly by Titov. Essentially, they let Ferdakis release his emulator on Steam without suing him into the ground, as long as he does all of the work and they still take home a cut, which was a pretty great deal for OP Productions and the best that Ferdakis could realistically hope for. So, contrary to popular belief, Ferdakis does not legally own the Infestation franchise in any capacity. He's an independent developer who has permission to develop Infestation titles as long as he splits the profits with the actual IP holders. This deal was good timing for OP Productions, as the original Infestation's player base had finally fallen below 1,000 players. So on November 22nd, 2016, Infestation NewZ released on Steam, and the same day, the original Infestation announced that it would shut down on December 15th. A lot of the information directly implying that the NewZ was an emulator built from leaked source code has since been deleted, but the game's official website is the same domain name from that period. So if you access it through the Wayback Machine, you can see the original trailer for the server and the name of the now private Facebook account NewZMU. Apart from this, the only remaining evidence of its past are the numerous comments from people around the internet. Unlike Hammerpoint and OP Productions, Ferdakis had pursued legal action against some emulators since NewZ became official. Although in such cases, it seems to have been a result of using NewZ's assets rather than an issue with the competition. Still, it was a higher standard than the emulation community had previously faced. But enough with this background. What was this Infestation remake actually like? Would it save the game? Predictably, a lot of the fundamental issues still existed. Snipers would take you out shortly after you'd spawn, or if you'd ever dared to poke your head out from cover in cities. The respawn timer was much less aggressive, only lasting 3 minutes instead of an hour. Of course, you could still bypass the timer altogether by forking over some cash. Bugs and crashes were back with a vengeance, this time being so bad that many literally couldn't even play the game because of how often it crashed. If you didn't live in the USA or Europe, you were out of luck because those were the only two regions with servers. The game had an overzealous anti-cheat system that turned up false positives, and a terrible support team to talk to if you did happen to get banned. There were far less cheaters than in the original Infestation, probably because a former hacker was now at the helm. Silver linings, I guess. The game had other improvements too. For one, it was now completely free to play. A bit of a slap to the face for the owners of the original game, but it made Infestation more accessible for newcomers and really set it apart from other games. The only similar free-to-play title at this time was Unturned, which didn't have an art style that appealed to everyone. Not to say that NewZ was a graphical masterpiece by any means, but not everyone wants to feel like they're playing a Roblox game. Every other option either cost money to play or scratched a different itch. Plus, when NewZ actually worked, people generally found it to be enjoyable. It just usually didn't work. You could also bank on there being a whole bunch of players on the servers because a lot of people ended up giving the game a shot after it launched, especially since it was now free. Ferdakis would regularly livestream, post dev blogs to YouTube, and host frequent in-game events. Plus, new content was gradually being added on top of all of this. So there was a genuine community here for a while. It had over 10,000 players per month for the first 5 months after launch, and over 5,000 for the next 5 months. But after this point, the player count started to drop, and by June of 2019, the game failed to break 1,000 players in a month for the first time. This trend continued into 2020, with the game eventually dying yet again. Would Ferdakis finally let Infestation go to rest, or did he have a plan? Well, of course he did. In order to revive Infestation again, for the 4th time, he decided to release a Battle Royale version for free on Steam. It was pretty much just a game mode put on the storefront to gather publicity for NewZ. It even included an option to launch NewZ on the title screen. The game was met with the typical critical reception that you'd expect at this point and the same vein of complaints. There were a couple new issues, however. It took ages for people to queue into a match, and the game's engine was really showing its age by now. This led to disappointing matches with only a few players after waiting around for half an hour. It wasn't worth putting up with when so many similar games were already free and had far fewer issues. It was just a short-sighted attempt to try and capitalize on the Battle Royale trend, and it also died pretty quickly. The other attempt involved relaunching the original Infestation, yet again, as the new and improved Infestation Survivor Stories 2020. At least, that's what it seemed like to an outsider. What actually happened was that the original Infestation just became another launcher for NewZ, meaning that there was no game whatsoever. It was basically just another way to play a free game that had been out for over 4 years at this point. Basically, it was an attempt to draw in the old owners of the original Infestation to check out NewZ with some fancy branding. So, did it work? Well, a little bit. The players it brought in pretty much just poked their heads in out of curiosity and then ducked back out. At this point, things looked pretty bleak for Infestation in the West. DayZ had finally released as a standalone game and at least partially recovered from its troubled launch. So, Infestation had even more competition and less reason to exist than ever before. With Fredakis at the helm and Titov standing on the sidelines, he now had room for a new project, one that was entirely different from these Infestation disasters. So, he set his sights to creating a new zombie game in 2020, one completely removed from the Infestation franchise altogether. Would Titov finally produce his perfect game? This new title was called Outbreak New Dawn, and it was designed to be a spiritual successor to Infestation. Unlike many of Titov's past titles, the game didn't reuse any assets from prior releases. This was an opportunity to do things right, but as luck would have it, things didn't turn out that way. From the game's announcement on April 14th, 2020, there was little player interest and quite a bit of skepticism. Once people actually got their hands on it on May 15th, public opinion didn't change. Few even checked it out, and those that did found it to be too similar to Infestation. The gameplay really didn't have anything unique to offer. It was just another open-world zombie survival game, and by then, there were plenty of better options in the genre. I'd say more about it, but the game isn't available anymore, and basically no reviews have survived. Without a player base to work with in early access, there was nobody to get feedback from or a way to fund its development. Paired with fears of rehashing Infestation and starting the whole controversy over again, Sergey Titov opted to cancel the project. The game's failure in the West probably also contributed to Titov's decision to sell his shares in OP Productions in 2020. So not only does he no longer work on Infestation, he doesn't even profit from it anymore. Which means that it seems like Frederick Chesnais, the ex-CEO of Atari who keeps coming up in this story, is still the one who's profiting from Infestation. I tried to reach out to him, I never got a response, so I can't confirm this, but unless Chesnais also sold his shares in OP Productions, that means that he would be the one who's still profiting from this game. I could dive into Chesnais in an entire video because of what he did at Atari, basically killing the Roller Coaster Tycoon franchise, which I did talk about in a previous video, as well as trying to do some really questionable things for Atari, like launching a cryptocurrency and an Atari-branded hotel. I'm also not even going to dive into the fact that when Atari launched this cryptocurrency, the company who helped to do it was also owned by Frederick Chesnais, and that he stepped down from Atari after this deal to now focus on his new company, Crypto Blockchain Industries, which again were the people who created the Atari cryptocurrency. If you want to learn more about this, I'd love to make a video on the downfall of Atari and connect the dots here, so if you'd love to see that, please let me know in the comments. So while the entire Outbreak New Dawn thing was going on, Infestation was still somehow surviving loosely in the background. And on September 30th, 2024, a huge update was announced for the NewZ, aka Infestation Survivor Stories 2020. It was titled The New Beginning, and it would overhaul the game's survival mode into the best of the original Infestation's aspects with the best of NewZ's. At least that's what the idea was pitched as. The game would rise from the ashes on November 9th, 2024. Even though the original game is identical to NewZ at this point, the update coincided with yet another rename for the original Infestation, The New Beginning. Many core issues that were in the game prior still existed, such as overabundant loot and buggy gameplay. Even though the intention of the update was to restore elements of the original Infestation that people used to enjoy a long time ago, it didn't even succeed at that. Veterans were dissatisfied with the lack of classic maps, despised the addition of clans, and took issue with the current state of skill trees. And that's where the game sits as of today. Whether or not it manages to change its disastrous course remains to be seen, but the franchise seems to be as good as dead in the West at this point. While not a financial failure by any stretch of the imagination, the Infestation franchise has been a reputational disaster and a confusing one since its inception. The game made Sergey Titov's name synonymous with early access ripoffs and some of the worst games imaginable. In part due to this negative perception, Titov has left his days of working directly on games behind. Instead, he's now periodically investing in games games in studios that interest him, such as Project Elite. He currently works at the Games Fund and Metaverse Labs Partners, two companies he helped to establish. He also regularly responds to inquiries and overall seems to be doing well for himself. Frederick Chesnace, one of the investors for Online Warmongers as well as the War Z, became the CEO of Atari from February of 2013 until April of 2021. Today, he operates that company that I mentioned called Crypto Blockchain Industries, which specializes in crypto. He also still invests in other games through Curve Ventures and maintains a friendship and occasional business ventures with Sergey Titov. If you'd like to see a deeper dive into Sergey Titov's other titles, let me know in the comments. There are still a ton of other projects that he's connected to from 2010 to 2020, many of which he openly admits to reusing assets for, which were received about as well as War Z originally was. So this brings up the question, is Sergey Titov a scammer, or is he just misunderstood and really bad at making decisions? I'll link the entire conversation I had with him in the description below, as well as all of my other sources as usual. So feel free to take a look and come up with your own opinions. Did you ever play the War Z, Infestation, Infestation New Beginning, Infestation 2020, or all these other games? Let me know in the comments. Did you like the games? Did you hate them? I'd love to see what your opinions are. I want to give a huge shout out to my writer, Connoisseur, who co-wrote and helped to research this video. He has his own channel where he does deep dives into all sorts of interesting games, like this one on Takeshi's Challenge. Check him out if that sounds up your alley. I will see you guys next time, and peace.